Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have very special guest, Steve Hall. He is back on. Again, I think I said this is the fifth or sixth time. I think it's somewhere around there. And actually, I tagged you in this, but right before I got on this, I was looking at my archives, and our second episode we recorded, which was episode 22 of my podcast, came out 2 years ago today. So kind of funny that we're chatting today. So Steve, welcome back on the podcast, man.
Thank you for, yeah, I can't believe it's been that many times. And we are just talking off air how time flies. And I can't even think that it's been that long. We've known each other that long. Like, it's a bit of a weird social media. I mean, that's the way it's all going. We actually just spoke about this sorry for the tangent, on the improvement season with Pascal. We're talking about AI, and I brought up the movie Her, which basically this guy falls in love with an AI. And I was like, that's like where we're going, right? Like, people are complaining about social media as all our relationships and connections are through this platform. And I mean, I would call you a friend, Jeff, and if we could meet in real life, like, I'd love to do that, but you're across the other side of the world. So yeah, it's crazy how many of my like good friends are actually just like internet friends and we get to do this, which is great. Otherwise we'd never see each other.
Yeah, no, I actually know exactly what you mean there. It is interesting to think, like if you would have told me like 10 years ago that I would have people that I never really met in person, kind of like you said, be considered friends would be super weird. But it is, I think it is cool to be able to do that, right? Because like you said, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to ever, connect. And I think it is really cool. But I'm sure you feel this way too. It's like you almost have like your friends in real life, but then you also have like your kind of like, as we're in this industry, like you're kind of social media friends, and then obviously like the industry friends as well too. And I think that's just super interesting.
Do you know Shimmy Hacker?
So is he the guy that like his technique is like just super crisp, like super like range of motion?
Slow eccentrics, yeah, really
Yeah.
large range of motion. So he is US based, and he came across the pond and came into London because he's got some like family business here. So we met up, and when you meet up, like if we were to meet up, Jeff, I imagine we just talk each other's face off, like just constant. Whereas like I have had friends who aren't like, they're not interested in the things I'm interested in. And so it's just a little bit more slow with them. And yeah, but when you do get to connect with someone, like I have some really good, like I imagine many of these people, like if we lived in the same city, I'd be seeing them, we'd be training together. Like it'll be like such a fun time, which is why I think like things like seminars and things like that are so cool, especially when people come from like large distances, and you can like, that kind of fuels you for like a few months where you're like, oh, nice. Even with clients, I imagine for you, like you build real connections with these people. They become friends. You're like, man, I've known you for years and we've been checking in every week. I've seen you more than, I don't know, like sometimes family.
Yeah. Well, and then I started kind of adding in some phone calls for clients too. And it's like, you maybe do Zooms or something like that. And like you said, you really do build that relationship with them. But again, you never like meet in person. But, I know you've done, seminars, like you've put together seminars, you've had Dr. Mike come over multiple times. I'm sure that's always cool to like have them like actually come over to see you. But do you have any plans of coming over to the States anytime soon, or are you because I know I'm sure with how expensive it is right now, it's probably not an easy trip to make over and whatnot.
I love the States. It is like a home from home for me, because when I was a child, I was lucky enough, my parents would take us on holiday very often. So I love it over there. Like the whole like huge Walmarts and like
Walmart,
like
yeah.
the food, the weather, like I just, and the people generally are just a little bit more friendly than like Londoners, as it is.
Really?
So yeah, and Canada even more so, like they're like super
Oh yeah.
friendly too. So I really like Canada and the US. Unfortunately, no real plans to go anytime soon. Partly because me and my girlfriend are terrible. We haven't been on holiday since we've had our dog. We haven't been abroad. Apart from I went to Vegas
Yeah.
for competing, which was a holiday. It was actually a holiday, most of it, to be honest. So that was really good. So that was the last time I was over. But I would like to make it over again. And actually, speaking of Mike, he has invited Mike and Crystal have like been like, you can come over, we can shoot content, you can stay with us for like a week. I don't know how much like in practice would they be like okay with it. They probably would be, to be honest. They're really nice people. So I should take advantage of that. You
Yeah.
just become a little bit less flexible when you have a dog. Like it's ridiculous. Like they are less independent than a child. You can't take them on holiday very
Yeah.
easily. And even like, I don't know, I see it's like scary stories where people leave them. There was something that came up recently. Someone left their dog with a carer, and that carer sold their dog.
Oh, wow.
They never got it back, and they made up a story that it had got stolen. And I was like, man, I'd never forgive myself
Mm-mm.
if I like, or even if it just a dog kind of carer took Ada and let her off the lead and she just ran off. I'd be like, I'd never forgive myself. So yeah, it's anyway.
Well,
Dogs are
that is,
amazing.
yeah, that is kind of crazy because, like you said, if you have a kid or a baby, it's like you could just pawn them off on your parents or something like that. Whereas like
Yeah.
you can't you probably can't do that with a dog, but or you could just take the kid with you too. That they would be easier to travel with, like you said. But yeah, no, that would be really cool to be able to go train at Dr. Mike's gym. What I will say here is I'm not sure if you've been to. It would be really cool to hang out with Dr. Mike, but I'll tell you what. If I were coming from another country, I don't know if Michigan would be the place I'd exactly want to go. I'm sorry to anybody if they are from Michigan, but I'm from Missouri, and I would say the same thing about where I'm from too. If I was living out of the country, I don't know if I would want to come to the Midwest. So
yeah, I haven't visited there. There's probably a reason for that slightly.
yeah.
I've been to Florida a number of times, and obviously I've been to I've been to New York, and obviously went to Vegas and probably some other places that I can't recall off the top of my head. But it's been too long since I'd like to go on holiday with Charlotte and go over. But even like, again, if I was to go on my own and try and maybe it'd be cool to do it as like compete like
Yeah.
in some US shows and do it as like a business trip. It'd just be, it's just hard when also I'm a homebody and I'm not one that loves being out of routine. So it'd be quite a stressful thing to do, and combining that with prep maybe would be the worst idea. But then
Yeah,
I'm shredded.
you're shredded. You get to show it off too. Yeah. Awesome, man. Yeah. So I also wanted to kind of talk to you about your training before we dive into some questions and the topic. So I know you said off air your feels good to be dieting. Like you said, that's not normal. But again, I'm sure people that have been purposely trying to gain weight for a period of time can definitely relate. So just kind of curious to hear how things are going on that end.
Sure. Yeah. Training right now is my philosophy behind kind of mini cut training is some of the most boring training you'll probably do. Slightly less boring than like if you're in a maintenance period and you're trying to just like train with maintenance volumes because your volume's super low and you're not really getting, well, it's the same for mini cutting, but your volume's slightly higher. Your rep ranges are generally a bit higher. Depending on your approach to kind of a maintenance period. And I think the first podcast we did was like on primer phases. So that's how we kind of give guidelines towards a primer phase, which is basically a maintenance phase and you train at lower rep ranges. Whereas I'm still training like in the hypertrophy rep ranges, generally capping around 15 reps just to like, if there can be some resensitization gained to 15 plus repetitions, I kind of try and get hold of that. But again, as I'm like 3 weeks into it now, pumps are kind of dropping off and like the stimulus side of things is dropping off, which is good. I say that confirms my kind of rationale behind using those like biofeedback measures. If they were like super good in a mini cut, I'd be like, I think I'm doing something wrong here. So yeah, volume's fairly low, like my typical minimum effective volume, kind of week one starting volumes, which to be honest, my overall volume doesn't change drastically week to week anyway. So it's not like it's crazy low, but what did I do today? I did leg day. So it was 4 sets for hamstrings, 4 sets for quads, and that was it. So nothing crazy. And so that's fairly boring with training. And I kind of also have the approach with the mini cut training that I don't try and be so progressive week to week. When I'm in a mass, I'm much more kind of assertive with that. But when dieting, I'm much happier just to be like, if I repeat performance on last week, that's fine. So long as I'm not seeing drops in performance week to week. If I'm maintaining performance, I can be pretty sure I'm probably maintaining muscle mass. And that's the goal right now during the mini cut is just to get that. And like I mentioned, capping my rep ranges, capping my set volume as well. Hopefully I get a bit of kind of a resensitization effect from having an extended lower volume period when I come into massing again, which just means I can get more from less and hopefully have a bit of a longer training window before I need to like scale back volume or anything like that.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, like you said, training during this time is pretty boring, right? Like you said, it seems like you're probably just going in there and like you said, just doing your best to really maintain what you have at this point. Obviously you're not trying to like add any muscle or anything like that during this period of time. It's, that's kind of the downside with that type of training, training when you're cutting, but the plus side is that you do get to, get a little bit leaner and things like that, which is always nice. But I think once you kind of go in and out of, cutting and gaining you realize how much better your training can be when you do have, enough fuel and whatnot. So for you, so how long is this mini cut? And, what are some things that you're kind of like focused on maybe like the nutrition side of things?
So it is probably going to be 4.5 weeks, unless I decide to just sack it off in that like half a week, because me and Charlotte, talking of holidays, we're actually going to go away, and my parents are going to look after Ada. They're
Awesome.
happy to take her for that period
Right.
of time. They're kind of being forced into taking her after like me guilt tripping them by accident. My mum's too nice. I think I take after her a little bit in that regard, but so yeah, we'll be going away, and that just means I might as well continue mini cutting until it, which is really nice because that touches on the nutritional side. Like I said, I'm not struggling. It's very easy. The weight's coming off real nice. And I'm actually looking forward to this. Is like backwards advice. You're probably the same with me, with Jeff. You wouldn't generally recommend someone go through an aggressive diet and go on holiday, because you'd be like, you're so likely to overeat, overindulge, all this. Whereas like I've been doing this long enough and I know myself, like it'd be very hard for me to like cheat or go off plan. Like I'm just not going to do it. And in fact, being hungry means food's going to taste better, and I'm looking forward to that. Like I just get to eat tasty food, and yeah, maybe I'm a bit hungry through the day, but I can manage that. I've been through, like, once you're kind of got down to like 5% body fat or thereabouts, you can deal with levels of hunger, and I think that trade-off is worth it. So yeah, diet side is, I essentially was massing on around 4,000 calories, came down to maintenance, which is probably around like 3,600, 700. And then I've dropped down to like 2,400, 500 now. So like I thought with some adaptations that are going to be taking place, probably about 1,000 calorie deficit, to be losing like a good percentage of body weight a week, around 2 pounds, would be nice and solid for me. My last mini cut I did many months ago, although it doesn't feel that long ago, but it was last year, like November, or no, earlier than that. I think that's when we went to Das Gym. It was like October time I finished, somewhere around there. So I've kind of been massing for the last 4 or 5 months into this one. And what was I going to say? So I essentially was just going to run it. And the way I would just run it is like, once my appetite's back, because the only reason I do it is for appetite, Jeff. Like I don't do it because I'm a certain level of body fat that I think is unacceptable. And I'm not competing this year, so it's not like I need to stay particularly close to my stage weight or anything. Although I have already been mapping. It's funny how when you prep naturally and like your timelines are longer than when you're enhanced, you have to start thinking almost like a year out. Like I've already started mapping backwards from shows in 2024 that I think I may do. So yeah, it's kind of lining up for that. So nutrition is, yeah, I just bring down calories aggressively, like 1,000 calorie deficit, trying to lose 1% of body weight per week. And nothing really changes. Protein stays pretty static. I actually bring my protein down a little bit because it's higher quality due to so many fewer carbs. Like I'm not eating 600 grams plus of carbs. They're like 200 plus. So I'm not getting those kind of lower quality proteins that you get from like a bagel because of the gluten. And it's like, yeah, you probably don't want to count that all as like a high quality protein, what have you. And then fats, I sit those around 50, but I'm not being particularly strict about that. If they want to go up, because I don't know, me and Charlotte get a takeaway and it goes up to like 70. As long as I stay within my calories and get my kind of protein intake, I'm happy about it. So that's kind of how it looks at the moment. Probably the most loose and flexible I've ever been in a mini cut, for sure. Because I always had in my mind, when you're mini cutting, like you don't do refeed. Well, not that I'm refeeding, but you don't eat out. You don't do like takeaways. It's like as harsh and aggressive as you possibly can. I'm like, just because I had this 4 weeks in mind or longer, which is probably longer than I need it to be anyway. And because for me to achieve a big deficit, I'm actually still on reasonable amounts of food. It's been a fairly relaxed approach. Probably from when people look at me and my eating through the day, they're like, that's relaxed. I'm like, well, yeah, I guess it probably looks very structured day to day anyway.
So that's pretty interesting there. So it sounds like you kind of backed off maybe a little bit. And so is it just because, I guess, what are the reasons for being a little bit more like flexible with this mini cut this time around?
I think I don't know if you agree with this, Jeff, but when you do this for longer, you gain experience and you don't treat yourself so much like a textbook approach, and you also realize what works for you. So and this actually is similar to me with mini cutting at this point. In my previous off season, I pushed past this point of feeling terrible for months and months. And I don't think it was productive. I think it was, my well-being was poor. My training wasn't any better. In fact, probably worse. And so I've just realized, oh, I don't need to push my body weight up as much as other people. My kind of productive range for massing is leaner and lighter than other people, or less pounds above stage weight. And as I've kind of learned that, I accept it. I'm like, okay, I stay in here. And then same with nutrition. I was always like, oh, mini cut, like that means like you just as like blinkers on, as almost as aggressive as possible. Whereas I can be much more relaxed. I've got the experience to be able to do that. I think it's probably similar to like, if you look at someone like Alberto Nunez and his approach to contest prep. And it was like, I think he almost didn't track the entire prep. Whereas there's nowhere first time competitors doing that, because they just don't have the skill set to be able to do that. But I can see, because he's been doing this for decades, that, okay, he has the ability to like know himself and know the look he's going for. And he can almost do it just like, it's so easy for him. So I think I've just realized, oh, actually, Steve, like you can go out and eat a burger and have a side of coleslaw, fit that in your macros, and it's absolutely fine. In the past, like I just didn't really have that knowledge about myself that I can do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So are you so are you, it sounds like, again, it seems like the flexibility comes in, like you're not just like sticking to like, maybe your quote unquote like diet foods, you're maybe being a little bit more flexible there, but you are still, pretty consistent with your with the deficit though, like the numbers set for the deficit. And is this maybe a not as large of a deficit as you have done in the past, or are you still going fairly aggressive there on that?
I'm kind of still just as aggressive, I think. Well, certainly 1,000. Like I don't really go like
Anymore.
less aggressive, and like 1% rate of loss. This has been pretty aggressive, to be honest, because I've already in these 3 weeks got as light as I did in my previous mini cut, and I started heavier this time round. So my like the weight at the start just came down so aggressively. I also was sick, and I think I missed my protein intake for the first time in like a decade or something, where I just literally couldn't eat. And that also, doing that and having that day where I did miss it was quite empowering in some ways, because it's like people get so caught up in these small things where like, yeah, I got half my protein in for the day. I got about 1,500 calories, which for me is a massive deficit. But now I'm here. Can I notice anything in my progress or physique that's been detrimental, like because of that? No. Like, yeah, sure, it's not going to have been a good thing, but people get so caught up in those little things where it's like, man, you could just never detect it. Like, I don't know, someone might stress they missed their creatine for 2 weeks. It's like, man, like that's just something not to stress about. In fact, the stress of stressing about that's probably worse than the missing of the creatine, and it's still a tiny percentage. So, yeah, I think this time around, just with the knowledge that it was going to be longer, and I think I have the flexibility though, where if my appetite was at a point where I was like, man, I'm really struggling today, I'm very hungry, I'd allow it to go up like 200-300 calories if it needed to be. But so far, it's just been comfy, kind of moving along this far. I did say to Pascal on the improvement season, well, I think I could probably approach this almost like Bert did with his prep, where I could just kind of mindfully go through the day. And I think the issue would be I'd be in too big of a deficit and I'd kind of hit a wall too fast, because I seriously was overeating. Like I didn't want to eat rather. So yeah, that's kind of how that's looking.
Cool. Yeah, I was just curious on that. I'm going to be going into a mini cut here next week, and my thought on it is, again, for me, it's less of like, hey, I'm trying to like lose a ton of body fat. It's more so like I've just been in a surplus for a long period of time, and I feel like just to me it would make sense like physiologically to get out of a surplus, because like I've been in it basically since May, so we're talking, what is that, 9 months, right? So it's like I just feel like physiologically it would make sense to like just get out of that surplus for a little bit of time, and just kind of again get away from just trying to continue to push body weight. I've been going at it a little bit slower this time around, but again, I feel like getting out of it for a little bit is going to be helpful. But I was just, again, I'm trying to use it more so just from a standpoint of that, and just like you said, hunger, just kind of bringing getting hunger ramped back up a little bit, rather more so than being like, hey, I want to get like shredded, during this, or get leaner during this time.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of people use mini cuts inappropriately, but it sounds like yours is well timed, because I think some people think they just like, and I certainly did in the past, where I just felt like, oh, I've been massing for a while and I should take one. But in reality, I was still like very lean, and I was not in a position where my appetite was an issue at all. Like I was still quite hungry. And when I entered that mini cut, and that's what I would say to people, if they enter a mini cut and they feel terrible in like that first week and they're like, man, how am I going to survive this? I'm kind of like, was a mini cut appropriate for you right now? Maybe, or they went too aggressively, or it just wasn't the time for them to do a mini cut. Because again, if you're not going aggressively, it's like, should you have mini cut or just gone through like a standard cut or just continue to gain potentially?
Right. Well, yeah. So I like that approach, like you said there. Just kind of like you start to learn more about yourself, and again, you become less like textbook with it, and again, you kind of alter it towards what you need. And again, you know your body very well. You've tracked this stuff for years. So I guess off of that, you said that you kind of found this kind of like sweet spot in terms of body weight for your massing, where it's like you go over that, you start to feel, not so great. What, I guess, was that something that you recently found out, or has this been something, maybe the last couple of years? Because again, I know we've talked about this, I think, pretty regularly about how you do see your hunger kind of just go down the drain when you get to a certain weight. So what kind of made you realize, hey, this is kind of that sweet spot for me?
Yeah, it's the symptoms of when I try and push past 195 pounds. And that happened every time I got there, my last off season before that 2021 prep. And then it's happened both times I've got there this time round. And the symptoms I experienced, they're not like just I'm bored of eating, or like, it's like I use every trick in the book. My food will be palatable, and I will be sitting in front of a meal and I'll be like nauseous, and it will, and my digestion also goes really poor. So I'll be I actually am unproductive in the mornings because I'm sat on the toilet for too long. Like, I know it's a little bit too much information, but like, it's just not a fun time. And then because I don't know if you've ever had this, Jeff, as well, when your digestion's off and your stomach feels a bit, you go into a training session, especially legs, and I'm like, man, my core stability just feels off. Like, I feel like I could vom any part. So it's just through the whole day. It's not just that, like, I'm being that person that's like, I don't know, they're sticking to their bro foods or whatever. It's like, I'll try every trick in the book, try and get that food in. And I think I've even taken it at times too far towards like hyper palatable foods, and that's also impacted my digestion. So I try as much as I can to find this balance, and whatever way I swing it, I just keep hitting this wall. And I think I too much looked at other kind of natural bodybuilders who maybe pushed 30 to 50 pounds above stage weight. And I'm like, in my head, I felt like I needed to do that. I'm like, well, what do you preach? It's like, put your coaching hat on. You preach staying in a productive kind of body composition range where you feel good and can perform well, because performance in the gym and progressive overload is the driver of muscle growth. So if you can stay leaner and progressively overload and get stronger in the hypertrophy rep ranges, hey, have at it. Like, probably most people actually want that versus being even bigger. So I've just kind of accepted that. And I think I chatted to Eric Trexler about kind of the work where we've always probably talked about settling points and settling ranges, where it's like this range of body fat you feel good at, above that and below that you start kind of not feeling great. And it's been updated towards being like intervention points, where you have this upper intervention point where it's like the body's like, dude, you're getting so unfit and unhealthy that like a predator's going to come and eat you, or you're not going to be able to like hunt and run around. And I think I just have like a lower intervention point than other people. And the same with like, I could probably I kind of hover around being leaner than most people feel comfortable at as well. And you have like averages, like everything's like a bell curve, and I'm just probably more towards like the leaner side of that bell curve. And I just have to realize that for myself, rather than being stubborn and put myself into a box. And that applies to so many things, like training volume or whatever. You see people at either end of the extreme, and you're like, you gravitate towards the people that you see being successful, but it's like, what works for them isn't necessarily what's going to work to you. So it comes back to that kind of individualization. Yeah.
This is kind of probably not where we thought you would go with this, but is your family, like, are they naturally kind of leaner as well too, do you find, or?
It's a good question, because not really. I would say, and like, I love my mum to bits. She had like slightly on the overweight side. My dad is very into his fitness, very focused on his nutrition. When he's not focused on his nutrition, though, he doesn't get overweight, but he's not as like slim as he is when he's like focused on it. He got very into it over the last few years. I think that's like age for you, right? You focus on these things more. And then my sisters, like, they're not like miles overweight, but they're not like slim individuals, I would say. I was different to the rest of my like siblings in that way, because I was just this kid that was just always active. Like you could see my ribs through, and like when I had barely any muscle mass, like I was a very skinny kid. And yeah, I think my sisters would get annoyed with me because I could get away with eating like anything and would never put on weight. So yeah, no, the rest of my family aren't like super slim individuals and skinny.
Yeah, because it's just interesting. I mean, from there, it just basically sounds like, you're. This is because I've had this conversation about like the dual is it dual intervention model? I think is that what it's
Yeah,
called?
that's it.
And like basically, I mean, you do have that, but at the end of the day, like what you do in terms of your like lifestyle, your environment is going to play a massive role. And you obviously live a very healthy lifestyle, so it's like once you combine those things, then yeah, you're probably going to have a tougher time, gaining a ton of weight because of your environment. Whereas, maybe some other people just they don't have as good of habits as you. And so it's easier for them to, get to that higher end and whatnot with it. So.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder what, like if I restricted my steps massively, like would I still, and like reduced energy expenditure essentially, rather than trying to increase the other side of the energy balance and increase my intake, could I still push past these points, or would I still experience these kind of nausea sensations? I don't know. My in my head it would make sense that I would still experience them. And unfortunately, it's pretty hard to put it into practice because now with the dog, it's so hard. Like literally, I do all her walks, and like I don't give her excessive walks. And then my gym is a 5-minute walk away. And when I do that, I hit 13,000 steps. Like it's hard for me to bring them down. Like I'm not at a stupid number of steps like you see some people, but that's still fairly high for me. But actually, me and Pascal, because we're like opposite ends of this spectrum, we're talking about it again, and like literally my mini cut calories are his massing calories. It just doesn't make sense. But when you can see, when you know the kind of science and how people are different, you can understand it a bit more. But we're very similar heights, not that different in body weight, similar training volumes, similar step counts, but energy kind of intake and like requirements are so different.
That is really interesting. But and I think a lot of people forget that it's like there's not that kind of one magic number there with calories. It really is going to depend. I would be curious. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you feel the same way. I would never tell somebody, hey, purposely try to move less, because I think for you, it's like just based on everything that you do, you found that productive range, and it's like I don't think that's bad that you found a range that again keeps you a little bit leaner. I'm sure you're okay with that. And whatnot. But it would be interesting to see if you did drop your steps, because I know there's some research on that. I know Eric Helms has talked about, I think he had it in mass one time where, once you get, it's like, if you're sedentary, you do kind of have some like appetite dysregulation, and you find that those people typically eat just as much as people who are, more active. Right. And so, it would be interesting to find out if your activity levels are a big thing there as to why you really get that kind of hunger response or lack of hunger response once you push your body weight up.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because this has just reminded me of, I think it was in the Sports Gene with David Epstein. I think it might have been that, or I listened to a podcast he was on potentially, and basically he was talking about, he interviewed this like crazy, she might have been a triathlete or something, and she'd literally just done like a race or like multiple races. It was like she's crazy, like the endurance events, and she just doesn't feel comfortable being like static. Like he was interviewing her and she was jogging like round the airport because she literally just ran the race like the last, like yesterday. You'd think she'd be exhausted and happy just to sit down for an interview, but she was like, no, I don't feel comfortable, like I have to move. And I have to say, I'm like that person that like if I go to a spa, I find it so hard to just switch off and relax, whereas I'm like, I want to be up moving. I'll be the guy tapping his leg or whatever. So yeah, there's something like, again, it comes back to that, like how much can you trick the body? So often it wants to just fight you back to homeostasis through kind of things that aren't even in your, like, you're not even thinking about them. Like it's completely outside of your control almost, some of it.
Have you mentioned this in the past too, where do you find that your calories, did you say you have to drop them more than you would think to lose body fat? Or do you find that, I can't remember where you feel like you fall on that spectrum?
Yes, once I get past a certain body weight, it like I have to really start dropping them, and I adapt quite quickly. When I'm in my, actually at this I can use my analogy here. You might have seen it. I talked about it on my story. It just came into my head. I was like saying how when you're in this, like within the dual intervention model, like within that range between your upper and lower intervention points, it's like moving on a freeway. You enter a deficit, weight just comes off. You go into a surplus, weight just comes up. When you start moving out of that kind of freeway and you're on like the rubble on the side of the road, it's really hard to make any edgeway. And I think for me, when I get below about 180 pounds, that's where like I really have to start, like bodybuilders would call this the digging phase, where they have to just like keep dropping calories because the body is being, or it's like that, like people would have previously called it like your lower level of body fat, where to get below that, you really have to push below to get down below it. So yeah, I think for me, that's where I have to drop it. Whereas like now for my mini cut, it's not like I have to keep dropping it week on week. It's like, no, I'm in this range that's productive. So it just comes off real quick. So yeah, I think that's also a nice realization. I've not actually thought about it until you've just questioned me here about it. Because I have said it before where, oh yeah, I adapt up, but I also adapt really harshly down. But really it's only when I think I get to these points, I start really adapting up when I get into the 190, 95s, and I start really adapting down when I get below this kind of 180 pounds.
Yeah, that stuff is just all super interesting to me. And then you like also take, again, like we talked about, you also take into consideration the environment that's around you, right? Like your habits, your lifestyle. And then even like another thing to add to the equation, your body composition too, what's that weight made up of? I think that's all going to play a massive role there. And I just find that area of stuff just super interesting. And whatnot. It's still kind of murky to me a little bit, but I think as a whole it makes sense. But again, I just feel like with all of it, there's a lot of nuance that goes into it. But I think it's super interesting to hear how different people are, and just again, I think it just points out that it's hard. I'm sure you get this all the time. Like, hey, what do my calories need to be, or what do my macros need to be? And it's just like I don't even know where to kind of start with it. At this point, because it could be that there's just that large range from person to person there.
Yeah, it so just brings you back to seeing what's happening in real time, take an individual as an individual. I get that all the time with clients who have these really specific questions. And I'm like, yeah, but practically this doesn't matter. We just have to look at what the scale's doing and how that's changing. It might be like, I don't know, I'm hungry during my mass gaining phase. It's like, well, like if you're gaining at an appropriate pace, you don't need to eat more, even if you are hungry. Like there's so many reasons you could be hungry. You need to look into that maybe first, but just being hungry isn't a good enough reason to eat more. Same way, if like you're not hungry in a deficit, like I said, it's not always a reason to eat even less. If you're losing it at like an aggressive pace, you don't want to just lose as fast as you possibly can, because that could lead to risks too.
And yeah, I think again, like you said, learn, to go back to kind of what we talked about originally with this, like learning about yourself too and figuring those things out, I think are important. I think there's a lot to like, I'm sure again with your clients, it's like, maybe they've never kind of periodized their nutrition before. And it's like, hey, your first fat loss phase isn't going to be your best one. Your first, gaining phase probably isn't going to be your best one, but you're going to learn things along the way and you're going to be able to kind of fine tune that for your body. Right. I mean, it took you a while to figure out that, hey, once I get past a certain point, that's, I got to back off now. But you didn't know that right away.
No, it's so funny because that actually, I used to stay like my history was staying too lean. And then I pushed to try it and I was like, okay, so that didn't lead to good results. So now I need to push my body weight up, and it worked. So I was like, okay, so I need to really keep like pushing your body weight up is so important. And now I'm like, oh, actually, maybe that's not what's driving the progress. It's actually me being in a productive range. So I think I was like on the side of staying too lean, and I still saw results, but not the best. And then I pushed to try and be like too heavy. My body just wasn't letting me. And now I'm realizing, right, let's find somewhere in the middle here. So yeah, it for sure takes time.
Do you think as you build more muscle, and again, I mean, with how much muscle you already have, it's like, obviously you're not going to be putting on pounds of muscle, year over year, but do you think that would alter that number maybe a little bit for you, depending on how much muscle you have?
I would have thought so. Like my 190 pounds now looks night and day since like 5 years ago. So I would have thought that these intervention points are more related to body fat percentage than like just pure
scale
weight. Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, that's kind of where I think it can get a little confusing with these numbers too, is like, again, that's not taking into consideration your body composition, which certainly is going to have it's going to play a massive role in that. So Awesome. Cool. Well, I said I wanted to go over a topic, but I think I want to get through some of these questions.
Sure.
Again, the topic I wanted to go through was shit that you used to get wrong, right? And
Oh yeah.
then, but we can just lead people to your Instagram on that one. That's a great post to look over. I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff, but we did actually hit on one of those, which was staying too
Yeah.
lean. So we did get to touch on one of them. But yeah, are you ready? You cool to dive into some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right. So first one is after a long gaining phase, want to get back to better stamina and heart health, how to effectively reintroduce while keeping up with goals of building muscle. And he kind of put at the end there, eat more / avoid certain types of cardio.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's something I've been looking into recently, and I think it's actually been maybe more people have been talking about it in terms of like adding cardio within a bodybuilder's program. We haven't released the podcast yet, but I did film one with Greg Potter just because he comes at it from a non-bodybuilding perspective. He comes at it and he's been in the like biohacking sphere a lot, which they're obsessed about health. So like he knows quite a lot about these sort of things. And like the he boiled it down to like when we were talking back and forth, where for a bodybuilder, it's important to be like a level of cardiovascularly fit to be able to recover from your kind of sets and from your training. But I don't think you need to be like crazy cardiovascularly fit for that. So I'm not sure cardio in for itself is really potentiating many bodybuilders training. There was that one study where I think it was like they did an 8 week or something lead in of cycling into like a 10-week bodybuilding program, and they built more muscle than the others. But I was like, what if they did 8 weeks of resistance training? Would they build even more muscle? Probably. So maybe there's some benefits there, but I think if you're already like fairly fit, I doubt it so much. And then for health, it's like how much when you are training for bodybuilding as well, and you do relatively high volumes, high intensities. You probably can attest to this, Jeff. When you do like a leg training session, your heart really works. Like it gets to a high level there. So it's not like it's not being worked at all. Like it's definitely being worked. And then if you have a reasonably like decent step count, I think it was like around 8,000 steps. Once you start hitting that, you see really big drops in like all cause mortality, and much more than 8,000. It's like still better, but not to a huge extent. So if you're reasonably like active, you do like high volume training and that sort of thing, and you're in like a healthy range of body fat, I don't know how much more you're going to get from adding cardio to that. And something that Greg put to me, he was like, if, as an example, for like either you, me, like Jeff, for yourself or me, if we did like a VO2 max, we probably do pretty well on it. And I can relate to this because I did a 5K. Like I don't know. I don't run ever. Like I used to in my like former life, but I did a 5K during like lockdown. It was for like charity, and I got like a really good time. Like people were shocked by the time I got. I can't remember what it was. Maybe sub 25 minutes, something like this. And I was like, if I worked on that, I'd get that probably like to 20 minutes or something. I could like it's a good time for someone who doesn't do any running. So I'm like, if you're cardiovascularly fit, do you need to do more cardio to get like the benefits? It's like, I'm not sure. So yeah, for like the health benefits, yeah, I'm not sure someone who, again, isn't sedentary, is doing high volume kind of resistance training, is in a healthy body weight range, has a healthy diet and everything. I don't know if they're getting much more from adding more cardio to that paradigm as well. But it's funny because I reached out, I think 2 weeks ago, to Mike Israetel, Mena Henselmans, and Eric Trexler. I want to do a roundtable on like cardio for bodybuilding and touch on like what if the person also cares about their health. The interference effect is obviously something that a lot of people are worried about. I think that was overblown, but now people have even taken it like the other way, where it's like you can do as much cardio as you want. It's not going to impact your training at all. It's like, no, it will. Depends on like timing, duration, intensity, all of those matters. So yeah, it's basically for the majority of my athletes, like cardio is something that I just use as an energy expenditure tool. If they're very sedentary, we drop in some cardio. If they've got a good step count and we don't need more energy expenditure, then it's not something I'm also adding in there as well.
Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it too. I just feel like, again, past a certain point, it's like you probably need less than you think, really, to kind of get those benefits. And then, like you said, I mean, you do too much, and it's like, now you probably are going to start to negatively affect muscle growth in some capacity, right? I think, again, the more you do, the more demanding it is. I think that really starts to, play a big role there. But I agree. I think that, if you're lifting, like you said, 4 or 5 times a week, you're getting your heart rate up and that, which you are. I mean, like you said, if you're pushing yourself, you're definitely getting your heart rate up, getting your steps. And I think you're in a good spot there. It's kind of funny to see how this kind of has played out, right? It was like any cardio is bad, you're going to lose all your muscle. Now it's like on the other side, how the pendulum always swings either way on it. Is there like certain types of cardio maybe that you would, in this situation, that you would, again, say they do want to try to build muscle, that you would maybe try to have them avoid more than others?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think generally less impact is probably going to be better. So things like cycling on the cross trainer or swimming, they're probably very good ones. I would probably avoid, mostly it's just running. That's probably the one I would avoid. Running and sprinting, they're kind of just more likely to kind of injure someone due to the kind of impactful forces that are going on in that. And unfortunately, I mean, I would never, depending who they are, like if they're a serious competitor and they're in better prep, maybe I would be like, yeah, don't do sport. But sport is clearly, some sports are more injurious than others, but like, don't know, I've spoken to so many people who have like picked up a arm injury or something from like playing basketball or football or rugby or what have you, soccer. So yeah, they're probably something if you're like very serious about it, you might avoid team sports as much. But again, like most of my clients, I want them to enjoy, like they do that because they enjoy it. So like, let's enjoy that and have a bit in there.
Well, there's inherent injury risk with anything. It's just it's going to be a little bit higher, doing something like that's, you play at a fast pace like that. You got other people and it's dynamic. That's always going to increase your injury risk.
Yeah.
And two, I think Brad Schoenfeld had something come out about this recently too, where, and this makes sense too, right? Again, the more muscle you want to build and the more muscle you already have, I think that kind of lowers your threshold for how much you can do before it starts to have an effect as well too, right? Like that's another big thing where if you're somebody that, again, maybe don't have a lot of muscle mass at first, it's like probably not going to play as big of a role, but as you want to build more muscle and you get more muscle, then it's probably going to start to have a little bit of a larger impact as well too.
That makes a ton of sense. Absolutely. It's kind of like similar to when bodybuilders need to specialize because they can't even grow everything at its maximal rate, because when they take every individual muscle group's MRV, it's larger than their systemic MRV. So they got to start specializing. Or I always relate it back to school. Like the experts in a field have to be super specialists because you can't be an expert on everything because there's only so much brain capacity you've got to learn these things. So yeah, that makes sense that someone's more advanced, it would have a bigger impact for sure.
And he kind of asked too, like, would you eat more? And I'm just curious to kind of hear your thoughts there on that too. I would assume that, again, you would probably just look at like, what their body weight's doing and things like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I certainly wouldn't just, what's it called? Presume that they're going to need to eat more. It would definitely be a case of seeing how the scale's responding because, yeah, unfortunately, some people have larger kind of compensatory effects than other people. And so, I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you are and how you want to take it. But yeah, I wouldn't just expect, I'm doing, 30 minutes of cardio extra a week. I need to therefore compensate for that. Because yeah, I've got into situations where we've started doing that with a client. It's just been like, actually, you're basically eating up this energy expenditure through being lazier through the day somehow. That's at least what the scale's saying. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of interesting research on like, how your body will compensate based on the energy balance you're in, right? So again, I think that just comes down to, you like you said, you wouldn't just, hey, you're doing more cardio, let's throw more food on. Again, you would look and kind of see what the client's like biofeedback is, their results and things like that.
Yeah, I
Cool.
think it's like if you use MyFitnessPal and you like enter in your activity, it like gives you calories back. It's like people get into trouble when they do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point too, right? Like definitely don't do that because that causes a lot of noise. I know Dr. Mike's kind of approach on this, just like, again, just eat regular and then kind of let your body weight be that guiding factor there in terms of where that's trending. And I think that's a great approach to it.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. So next question is, getting really strong seems to be a big focus of a lot of natties. They specifically called out natties. I don't know why, but is that misguided or a good approach?
Yeah, I think it's it can be misguided. It can be a good approach. It kind of depends how you take it. So the goal as a bodybuilder is not to get as strong as possible. It's just not the goal. But to get as big as possible, getting stronger helps, or rather, it doesn't necessarily help. The process that gets you stronger leads to gaining more muscle as well. So it's like it's more of a bonus that comes along with things. So I think when people hyper focus on, I need to get as strong as possible, that's a powerlifter's objective. You're trying to get as big as possible. By doing the things that get you as big as possible, you inherently have to get stronger, because as you get bigger, you get strength adaptations. So it's kind of that chicken and egg scenario. It's like you don't hit a strength PR to grow. You actually have grown. It's all the work you've done in the prior to that that's led to that strength PR. It's kind of that kind of like Brian Miner kind of really kind of help people understand that, where it's like, so long as you're like doing the objectives you need to do in the background in terms of meeting volume and intensity thresholds, you are accumulating good work that's going to lead to growth. And when you hit a PR, now that's signifying the growth. So I think what that advice in a negative way can get people to do is to chase strength and to chase numbers. And that leads to lack of focus on the what a bodybuilder's trying to achieve. And that's like generating stimulus through the muscles. And they focus also, a lot of people, for some reason, don't think about being like using less weight and getting stronger seems to be like not an okay approach. You would need to be using as much weight as possible and getting stronger. Whereas it's like, actually, when you look at the people who are the strongest using the most weight, they're powerlifters. And that's not your objective here. So I don't know if I answered that question well, but because it's not bad advice inherently, it's how you take it on board. And I do think a lot of people unfortunately take it the wrong way, and they just think more weight on the bar is better. It's like, no, it's what is that weight doing for you? You're trying to fatigue a muscle, and actually kind of being weaker and using less weight while still generating the same amount of tension and fatigue through the muscle is almost better, because you're probably not getting as much like unwanted fatigue in the background.
Yeah, no, you answered. I think that was a great answer, because like you said, it's like it is a good approach, but at the same time, it can't be taken, too far, where like you said, people just try to chase weight. And it's like, again, that's not necessarily what is going to get you to build muscle, right? It's like you said, you do need to get stronger, and you getting stronger is a good sign that you're building muscle. But again, just chasing that, like doing more weight, isn't really what's going to get you there. I always, this is something I've been thinking about more lately. And I find that like to build muscle, I think that it's this weird thing where it's like, okay, so, obviously, like you said, you do want to get stronger, but you don't just want to necessarily add more weight. I think the challenging part with like the training you need to do to build muscle, it's like you need to obviously add weight over time, but it's also like kind of leading into that like discomfort of training, and like making sure that your technique doesn't break down. And I feel like that's kind of where the magic is in your training, right? And I think that's kind of where people miss out, right? They go, where they miss out is, again, they're just chasing weight, and it's like, oh, 8 to 12 reps, I'm just going to kind of check the box of that, I'm doing more weight, and they don't really think about kind of what they need to do within that set. And I feel like that's where a lot of people maybe go wrong, like long term with building muscle.
Yeah, this is good, because actually this is one of the mistakes I made on that post, where I said like I used to chase load on the bar, and I thought the more load I was using, the better. And in fact, it's again the tension you're generating through the muscle. And if your technique degrades, if you start using more momentum, you cut your range of motion, you introduce other muscle groups to help you with that. Now you're taking tension away from that muscle, and so you're kind of faking progress in a sense. And I have found this, because there's a fine line between making sure you keep the quality, but also needing to know, right, I need to progressively overload, I need to add a rep and add load, but you don't take away from the quality. That quality always needs to be there. Because I've had clients where I do advise them, like, try and add a bit of load each week, and they've come and reported to me like, Steve, that set wasn't the best. I changed my technique to get an extra rep or a bit of load. But it's like, if you don't always try and be a bit progressive in your approach, you could just like spin your wheels a little bit. So I do think you need to find like a fine line between the two. And most people know when that fine line is. And this is a great point about being like as strong as possible. If I took that kind of on face value, I'd look at myself and I'd be like, Steve, you have not really got much stronger over the last few years. And if you look at my numbers in my logbook, you could say that. But if you look at my approach to my sets, like the tension I'm generating on the muscle is way more. The stimulus I'm getting from every set is so much more. So whilst the weight hasn't gone up, my technique and the quality has gone up so much more, because I'm like pausing in the hole, got more of an eccentric control. I'm better at targeting that muscle versus introducing other muscles and things like this.
Yeah, no, and that's always, I think for a lot of people, a tough thing to get into because it's like, well, hey, I've been doing the same weight for a while, but it's like, yeah, but if your technique is better, your execution of it's better, it's like that's progressive overload, right? Because again,
Yeah.
you're putting more tension on the muscle essentially, which is ultimately what you want to do. Your body's, your muscles aren't like, oh, hey, Steve was doing 70 pounds 2 years ago. Oh, not gonna build any more muscle at that point, right? It doesn't think of it that way. So yeah, I think that's again, like you said, you can't take it too far though. I definitely agree that again, with this, it's like, we're not just trying to chase weight, but you can't take that too far. And then like you just focus on technique. And that's where I think a lot of people also get themselves into trouble where they end up not ever overloading or anything like that over time because they're trying to chase, maybe that like perfect technique or something like that. So again, I think this is where, again, individualization comes into play. It's like you have to kind of know yourself there and know, what's kind of holding you back.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, because there is definitely a trap on either end of the spectrum. Because I've had some clients where they are that perfectionist and they're sending me form videos every week. And I'm like, dude, your form looks great. Push, go. Like, I give you permission. And they're like, oh, but I could tweak this. And I'm like, no. It looks really good. Like, go with it.
And I hate to kind of make generalizations here, but I feel like generally what you see here is men typically will be the ones that are going to just kind of push the weight a little bit more and be like, oh, I'm just going to kind of technique, whatever. I just need to add more weight. That's what I need to do. And then women, I feel like generally fall in that other kind of spectrum where they're the ones that are like, they want technique to be so perfect that then they end up never like adding weight and they kind of get stuck there with that,
Yeah, I think men just have bigger egos.
Yes, it's just
generally.
ego. How many times have you had a conversation with one of your male clients of like, man, I just don't feel right doing like 15 pounds or 20 pounds on this exercise? I'm like, oh, you got to get over that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there is no shame in it at all. I feel more shame. It's so weird though. You walk into a gym and I'll be like, again, like pressing something less than this individual next to me. I'll have more muscle mass, whatever, like controlling it, full range of motion. If I was walking into the gym and seeing that, I'd be like, oh yeah, that guy, like with the technique, oof, that's great. He's got intensity. Whereas this guy, like half repping it, maybe double the load, not double the load, but more load that I'm using or something, that will draw the eye of the person that doesn't really understand what is driving kind of adaptations. And I used to, and the funniest thing is I was that guy in the past. I can literally remember a time where there was a huge guy and I was still at school at this point. There's a huge guy lifting. And I was like, man, I use the same weights as him. Like, he's so much bigger than me. And it's like, I didn't even consider how he was lifting it, which is completely different to how I was swinging it around.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I think you don't really notice it until you do. And then otherwise, like you said, it's just, yeah, like you said, you just don't even realize what's going on there. Like why that guy, like you don't even look at his execution or anything like that. It's again, you're just looking at what the amount of weight that he's doing. Yep. Yeah. So I think that was a good kind of answer to that question. So do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Cool. So I think this will be interesting to kind of hear your thoughts on this one, but do you think people would benefit from learning how to train without numbers in their heads? So he's saying this being like weight and reps and instead just learning proper intensity and body motion.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I was kind of asked one of these recently where essentially I think it was a situation where they're saying not to look at the logbook from last time and just like try and go to an RAR each week. And I can understand the reason for that, because like if you go via just the numbers in the book, then that can lead you to doing something wrong in this session, just like we kind of mentioned, where you're trying to add a rep to last week, but that leads to your quality going down. Whereas if you didn't look at last week, maybe you just do a quality set. But I think that can also lead people down like a trap where they do get a bit complacent, where they think they're working hard, but they're not really. An example I would use for myself as well for leg pressing. Leg pressing from week one is fucking hard as hell. Like for me, even a 3 or 4 RAR, like I have to gut that out. I'm nervous for it. I can do like a couple of sets or whatever. So if I was like trying to get closer to failure, I'd always think maybe I was probably closer than I was. And I'd probably continue to slightly sandbag that movement. So I think that's where people can get into trouble, where they need a bit of data alongside. I think they're better in combination, where you have the data, you have the logbook, you kind of know the numbers, but also you know how it feels for you. But I know where this person's coming from, because that can be like a situation where you've probably heard stories of people doing this, where like they're deadlifting and they misload the bar. They think they've got 80 on there, but they've got 90 and they're able to do it. And like, if they maintain the same quality technique and they're able to do that, that's awesome, because they had like a bit of a mindset around the number on there. So I think that is interesting too. And then you might even have it. I sometimes think about this where I'm maybe doing like a leg press and I'm like, what if Dr. Mike was watching me? Would I slow this down a bit more? Would I pause more? Would I fail 3 reps sooner than I think I'm going to fail? And so I try and put myself, like, just always kind of question myself in that regard, filming sets and trying to keep myself kind of objective as possible with those sort of things. So in some ways I see where this person's coming from. And I think you could test yourself. I think in that can be a cool way to approach like a final week of training, where you film yourself and you're like, right, I'm going to take this set to what I deem 0 RER or technical failure, and let's see how many reps I get on it. And then you could do that and not look at your logbook last week, apart from for the weight that you're trying to use or what have you. And that could be quite revealing in for itself. But yeah, I don't know. Where do you stand with this, Jeff? It's a bit of a tricky one.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, like you said, if you that actually approach, I think, would work really well, like you just said there, where again, maybe that last week you do just kind of push it to kind of see where you're at, and then you can really see, if you were all, how close you were to it and whatnot. But no, I agree with you. I think that if you don't have an idea of what you're doing, like you said, you end up getting into that kind of trap of, maybe you're just, again, you're working hard, but you're not necessarily ever making like progress really, because again, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. You end up, I would imagine if somebody did that, they didn't track, but like somebody was tracking their like weight and stuff for them, and they didn't have any idea, I would imagine that you probably would make less progress doing that than you would if you tracked it over time. If that makes sense. I would think so, at least.
Yeah, I think there's, at least for me, there's something about seeing the numbers and going into the set being like, I need to hit that number and I should be able to hit that number. And that I somehow work harder having that approach. And I think this is probably why someone like Jordan Peters is so big on logbooking. I think he's probably been the biggest advocate of logbooking, because for someone of his level, like the first rep is like terrifyingly heavy and really, really hard. And so for more advanced trainees where they are stronger, that room for improvement is so much finer. I think you almost have to be a bit pushy with it and have to test yourself. Whereas probably like taking more of a, like when you first get into the gym and you just work hard and you're just trying to improve technique, that's maybe where it can work better for you. So maybe more newbies be less focused on load. But as you're more advanced, you've already got the quality there. Like that's where you need to like start trying to push the number up, or at least like seeing it go up again. Like you don't want to force it.
There's definitely been times where had I not tracked or logged my previous workout and I just would have gone off feeling for a certain lift, I definitely would have stopped 2 to 3 reps before that, right? And again, maybe you do that one session or every once in a while, and it's not going to matter. But if you do that session, each session, that's going to add up over time, right? I mean, that's going to be something where that's a difference of, I mean, I don't know exactly what the number would be, but to me, that would make a big difference if you did that regularly, where you're, stopping, 3 to 4 reps away from what you think you could, actually get there. So I recommend logging for everybody. I think logging, if you're somebody that has been working out for a little while and you're not seeing the results you want, I think if you're not logging your workouts, that's like the first thing you need to freaking do.
Yeah. What is the saying? Like I don't know if this works for it. You can't manage what you don't measure, but
yeah.
The number of people you see, like more gen pop lifters, or they could be like guys who seem like they're fairly serious and they're just like, oh yeah, I think I did this last time. Like, let's chalk on some weight. It's like, are you really pushing the bounds enough, like, to make those adaptations?
Well, and then there's always going to be that outlier that probably doesn't have to do this and they can just lift weights and they'll be fine, right? Like that's definitely a thing. But again, they're the exception to the rule. I think this was on one of your conversations with Menno, like this was a while back, but for whatever reason, this was one of the podcasts that always stuck in my head. I think you had him on about genetics, and he kind of always mentioned like, with building muscle, it's like you don't necessarily, like if you would rather get advice from somebody that's like gotten lean rather than somebody who is like super jacked, because the person that's super jacked could just be there because of their genetics, where somebody that's gotten lean is like, they've obviously had to work hard to do that. Now, again, genetics play a role in that too, but yeah.
It's funny actually, because that's similar to what 2 guests have recently said. Jackson Pierce said it, and Greg Potter said it, and they're quite different individuals too. So for them both to say it was quite interesting, where they're like, you could learn more from natural bodybuilders than enhanced bodybuilders most of the time, because it's being enhanced is kind of like having a genetic card that's in your favor, you know, whereas the people who have struggled and for tooth and nail for something, like, yeah, you know, they've kind of worked something out there.
Well, sometimes you see this in sports too, where, you know, some of the elite athletes, like the best players in the sport, end up not like ever becoming a coach, but it's really the like kind of the more role players that end up kind of becoming the coaches, because they're the ones that, you know, really had to work hard for everything, and they kind of know the ins and outs a little bit more than, again, you know, somebody like, you know, I'm a hockey guy, so I think like Wayne Gretzky, like he tried to be a coach, didn't work out for him, and you know, it's just interesting how that happens.
Yeah, that's what I like. I definitely want to get to a point in my coaching career where like the people and it's been times where this has happened actually already, but like the people I'm taking to stage, like they are achieving things. I'm kind of achieving those things through them, because I know I might not ever be able to achieve that. But if I can help someone else get there because they have that kind of background of like they have those genetic cards that are in their favor, and then they can do it in a smart way through someone like me who has had to think about that a little bit more, that's like a really cool thing to be able to do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So cool. So I don't want to, you know, I want to be respectful of your time here, so let's is there anything coming up for you in the next little bit that you want to lead the audience to, or anything like that?
So possibly a seminar. Actually, I guess it's not too soon. It's in July if it goes ahead. We're looking to do one with the guys from JPS.
Cool.
That'll be more of a one for coaches, or people looking to get into coaching, because we'll be talking about a bit about online coaching practices, and we'll be going to a gym as well. It'll be a 2-day thing, so people can kind of keep their eyes out for that. And then we will be running later in the year. I can't remember exactly what month, but it'll be more later in the year. Jared, Mike, and I think Nick Shaw will be coming over, and we'll be doing our typical kind of not. We're actually not doing a seminar this time, because we found the seminar is not something that's what most people want. They want that one-on-one training time with the guys.
Yeah.
So we're just running more of those. Typically we do one day, but now we're doing like AM and PM sessions. Like, so 4 lots of groups can come in and train with us. We'll put them through their paces. And yeah, that should be a lot of fun. So people can keep their eyes out for that. I don't think there's anything else particularly going on apart from just the usual.
Awesome. Are you going to have links for that I can put in the show notes and stuff like that for either of those?
Probably not the first one. They probably have to, like, our newsletter, sorry, our email list were probably the easiest way to keep it. So maybe I can give you a link to our email list, which hopefully people don't mind. I think we send out maybe 2 emails a week, which have like just tips and things like this, not like spamming you. So yeah, I'll give you that, and that's probably the easiest way for people to keep up to date.
Plus, we'll probably have you on again before you have that JPS seminar. So, but yeah, either way, we'll add you to. We'll get the email list in the show notes. So cool, Steve. Well, again, appreciate your time, man. Always a great chat with you, and we'll talk to you next time.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me.